the Glasgow Azure user group. Tonight we've got two speakers. We've got Dave covering Docker and Andy covering Office 365. So we'll kick off with Dave first. Thank you.
Quite the toilet, guys. You want to use the toilet? They're using Apple Mix there. Those stairs are incredibly squeaky. It's a bit off-putting, so you've got those back stairs. The toilet's at the top of the stair. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. I want to spend the next 20 to 25 minutes covering Docker, what it is, how we use it, and then we're going to jump straight into a demo of how to use this technology in your day-to-day jobs. So first, who am I? My name is David. I organize a few user groups in Glasgow. I do recognize a few faces, which is great. So if you're interested in Docker, Cloud Native, DevOps, MongoDB, pair programming, any of the above, keep your eye up on the meetup.com page. We're always looking for new speakers too, particularly around Azure and the container service and a whole bunch of other things. So if you do have experience there, definitely try and grab a chat with me at some point tonight, and we'll get you lined up to speak at one of these groups. I'm a software consultant, so I spend my time helping my customers, my clients move to the cloud, adopt container technologies, and generally refactor large monolithic systems down into service-oriented architectures. I contribute to open source as much as I can. It's a very rewarding experience, and I get to program, fortunately, in a lot of languages. Now, I'm not listing all of these esoteric languages here as some sort of geek cred or anything like that. I'm doing it because I think it's really powerful that when you adopt containers as your development environment, so I'm focusing on you as a developer, setting your machine working, and not a lot on the production aspect of using containers. But your deployment cycle and the way that you develop changes a lot. Everything becomes exceedingly simplified. You don't have to worry about the different versions of the tooling, of the language, of the compilers that are on your machine. You're just able to write the code in the language of your choice, regardless of what you're working on, and it'll just work within a container, provided you know what you're doing. So hopefully I'm selling it enough to you that containers are going to drastically change your life, and that's a bold claim. So we're going to start with what is Docker. Does anyone use Docker in their day-to-day at the moment? The perfect audience, right? Like one hand. That's great. We're hopefully going to cover a lot of it. I am going to do a little bit of technical stuff. Are any Linux users here? Is everyone Windows? All right, we've got a couple of hands. So there's a little bit of Linux primitives that we're going to talk about as well and how containers work. But we are going to focus on the more outsidey aspects. We're not going to get too deep in the internals. So I think the most important thing that we get from Docker is that it's an ability to package an application, right? You might hear operational people speak about isolation, security, attack vectors, and all that, and they're all very, very important. But at the end of the day, as a developer, the most important thing that you're going to take away with containers is the fact that you can just write some code and you don't have to worry about distributing it anywhere. You don't need to worry about packaging dependencies. This has all been trivialized for us. So I like to think Docker, at the end of the day, is the ability to package an application. And that's a nice convenient way of doing it as well. So you'll see Docker and all of their marketing materials refer to these three verbs: build, ship, and run. And that's the three different aspects of containers that we're going to speak about. So building containers. I think what's important here is that they provide a simple interface. We all love simple interfaces. And that it takes care of the operating system dependencies as well as any internal dependencies within our application, depending on the language we're using. And it's a standardized unit, right? If you build a Docker image on your machine, it's guaranteed to run on any other Docker daemon on anyone else's machine, right? So we don't need to worry about that old thing of, oh, it works in my machine, right? I've not heard that in 5 years. I don't want to hear it ever again. So the working on my machine is now dead. We're going to focus on shipping standardized units of deployment. And this is a Docker file. I say that it's simple because it really, really is that simple, right? There are only maybe 7 or 8 different tokens that we stick in a Docker file. And by tokens, I mean the highlighted words. So the fact that we wish to copy something into a Docker image. The fact that we want to run a command within a Docker image. We also have the ability to set environment variables, arguments for build time, entry points and commands. One of the more complicated aspects of Docker, but I'm going to hopefully make that a little bit easier today. So looking at a Docker file, it's nice and simple. To build it, even simpler, right? We pull up our CLI, we type docker build, and then the -t just says that we want to tag this image. So by default, when you do a docker build, it builds an image and applies a SHA to it. That's not really good for telling your mate to go download the latest version of Elasticsearch followed by a SHA-256. So we add tags. In this case, I'm adding a tag of package version v1, and that's it. Shipping containers. Now, once you've built this standardized unit of deployment, is that we want to be able to either push it to a remote location or provide a means for someone else to pull that image and run it locally. Docker provides that, again, with a very simple interface. The fact that we can do a Docker push to publish our package to a registry, whether that be the Docker Hub or one of the many others that are available. Azure does have one that you can utilize. We just say push this image that I tagged with package v1, and then anyone else with the Docker installed on their machine can just do a Docker pull. And they'll be pulling down that image and able to run it at the same set of semantics that we used when we built it. Everyone getting this right? Nice and simple. Running. Any guesses of how we run a container? Docker run. And I'm going to back up for just a second, because I mentioned something in the bottom left here, right? This is not unlike a virtual machine. Is anyone using Vagrant or any other virtualization software on their machines for development? Ignore everything I just said. Okay, so we have the ability to take an image and run it. Now, in this case, we can run CentOS 7.1 or Ubuntu 16.10 or any other versions of those operating systems on our machine. I think what's really important here is that it doesn't matter what my underlying operating system is, right? If I'm running Windows 10, if I'm running CentOS or Red Hat, is that I can just freely run another version of that operating system on the same kernel and have access to all the usual tooling that I normally would. So if you are a CentOS user or a Red Hat user by day, being able to just do a Docker run Ubuntu and experience how to work with apt and all those other different toolings makes it very simple to play with without causing any destruction on your local machine. But what actually is a container, right? I'm saying that we can provide a simple Docker file with some really simple instructions and that we can build an image. We can publish and pull that image and we can run it. But what actually happens? So we're going to break this down into a few different components. The most important is probably the operating system virtualization. And I don't really know what that means, but we're going to talk in some of the primitives that the Linux kernel offers Docker that makes this possible. So namespaces and control groups. Namespaces are the way that the kernel lets processes see other processes on the machine. Now, what I mean by that is if you're on a Linux machine and you type PS, you can see a list of processes that are running. Now, if you've got a piece of software that you don't particularly trust, that's quite a large attack vector, right? Being able to see everything that happens on a machine means that they have a lot of information, and that information gives them the ability to find backdoors and other things like that. So being able to restrict that view of the system gives us this extra layer of security. And as well as the process isolation, we can actually isolate the network and the disk. Anyone ever used the chroot command on Linux? No, okay. A couple of people. It gives you the ability to say, I want to set this directory, which has any arbitrary amount of files in it that I put there, and set that as the root. So that's all that person has access to, or can see. And Docker gives us that as well. So when we run an image, and we're running, say, Elasticsearch, or PHP, or Mono, or any of these other tools, we're actually telling it, you have access to this directory only, or these files that I'm giving you access to. So we get to isolate the disk completely, right? It doesn't have access to the things that we have access to. Network isolation is also very important. If you're sitting on your machine and your IP address is 192.168.1.1, what if we can say, I'm going to run this MongoDB daemon, but I'm actually going to stick it in its own subnet. It's going to be a 172, and it's only going to have access to that subnet that I've given it. And now no longer can see the network activity from the host machine. And this isolation just builds on. All these different primitives build on themselves so that when we run a process inside of a Docker container, we can isolate it from it. So now, the more that we run things, and especially as you move towards the cloud, where virtualization is a core primitive that we have to deal with, right? We have virtual machines, and we run different processes on them, and when we run them in containers, we can guarantee that different teams, different software doesn't interact with my software. It doesn't start, launching loads of processes, eating up all the RAM, eating all the CPU, and then my process suffers, is that we can actually build an equilibrium with all the processes within our cloud. And that's all control groups are. You know, if you're running a web server that you don't want to be able to kill your disk by doing, 50 or 100 megabits reads per second, we can say that it's only allowed to do 1 megabit per second, etc. And that's everything that a container is. But we're going to dive into kind of each of these again, because I know these topics, it's easy for me to stand here and say, oh, process isolation, you don't see other shit. But really, there's a lot more to it. So PSAUX, this is what a command would look like on your host. Now, when you run a process inside of a container, it is always going to be PID 1, and that's really important as well. The fact is that whenever you launch a process in a container, we can end up with zombies, all right? That's an interesting concept. If you're not that familiar with Linux, then it probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but zombies just mean that if it's not process 1 and I fork off a sub-process, but then process 1 dies and they're not linked, then process 2 would still actually run on the kernel even though the container wasn't actually running anymore. That's another attack vector. If I can work your containers in a way that I spin off thousands of these zombies, even though the containers have exited, bad things are going to happen. So process isolation is super important in this regard, in that we want to minimize the risk of running all of these processes that maybe we're not familiar with. Maybe it's not our own software, or maybe it's other teams' software. Root privilege isolation, I spoke about how we don't want the user within the container to necessarily know what user they are from the host perspective, right? And it's quite a common pattern when you're running containers to not try and give any of them access to being the root user on the host. Why is that a big deal? If for some bizarre reason that the process that you're running within the container has a bug, which does allow them to exit and reach the host kernel, the user they are in that container is the user they are when they exit that container. So if you run your containers as a root user and they manage to elevate themselves out of that container, they're root on your host. And that's quite a nasty side effect. So you can do a docker run --rm, type who am I, you'll see root. What we can also do, though, is say when we run this container is that we want to specify a user of nobody. Nobody has no permissions on a host. So if they ever did manage to get out of that container, they wouldn't have any permissions on the host. You can actually configure that at the Docker daemon level as well. So if you are starting to look at running containers in production, you can configure this as a daemon setting, and then no container that runs would actually have any root access. Network isolation, the ability to mask the IP address. So even though, like we said, we have 192.168.1.1 on the host, when they look at the IP address within the container, they get a very different view of that world. They think they're on a 172 subnet. So they have no idea about the network connectivity that happens outside of that container. I used to do this in a demo. I don't know if you are familiar with rn-rf root. It will nuke the entire drive. And I was so confident once, I typed it with the no preserve root and didn't realize it wasn't in a container. I ended that demo very quickly. So I don't do it anymore. So now you've got this one slide. But feel free to try it on your own machine when I'm not here. Run a container, broot, and just do the rmf-rf and nuke away that entire file system. You realize that it doesn't matter, right? Containers by default run in what is known as a copy on write file system. So when you start the container, it gets a copy of a file system, and anything that you do that modifies that is a new layer on top of it. So you never modify the underlying layers. Even if you do kill them all, you can just exit out, run it again, and you go straight back to the original layer. It's very cool. You can also set it as a read-only container. Really cool if you're writing web applications and you don't want people to be able to have that attack vector of uploading malicious scripts for some sort of dodgy push request. So read-only, great. Feel free to run this command. I'm just not going to do it again. But control groups, I've already spoken about them. So why should we not just use virtual machines? Now this is going to be a tricky question because when I asked who was using virtual machines, we got one or two hands. So I'm assuming that most people just develop natively on their Windows system, and that's fine. That's just the way that it has been. But hopefully what we see, you'll learn how you can adopt containers to kind of adapt your development process to be slightly faster, especially when it comes to working with multiple versions. I don't know, what languages do people program in here? Is it C#? I just need one person to shout something. Python. Perfect, that's the greatest example, right? Because we have divergence, Python 2 and Python 3. There's a line in the sand, which side are you on, right? Docker, it doesn't really matter, right? Okay, Python has, the Python env thing where you don't really need to worry about it so much. But Docker also provides us that level of abstraction. So virtual machines have their own kernel. So when I was talking about root escalation, getting out of the container and onto the host, virtual machines do not suffer this flaw. And that is because they have a hypervisor. They have a solid emulation layer where it actually doesn't use much from the host except from the CPU itself. So if you exit a virtual machine or a process in a virtual machine, you only have access to that virtual machine. So in a strange little way, virtual machines are more secure, but containers offer a lot more benefit that make it a more viable option for development environments particularly. And that's because containers share the kernel. There isn't the virtualization there, right? You're not sending commands to a process as to convert them to another process and so on. It just works. The container processes do speak natively with the kernel. And because virtual machines emulate the entire operating system, they run their own kernel individually, is that takes time. Again, people aren't using virtual machines, but a common development pattern was Vagrant for a while, where people would just do a Vagrant up, it would spin up a virtual machine, it would be provisioned, which was also quite a slow process. And it could probably take between 15 to 30 minutes, depending on how complex that environment was, to provision it and get a developer up and running. And throughout my career, one of the biggest grievances that my developers always had are the people that were doing the front end of the website particularly, who weren't necessarily as technical a lot of the time, is that they say, oh, it's broken, and it's not working anymore. And my default answer was, well, do a Vagrant destroy and a Vagrant up. That's an hour of that developer's life, potentially, that they're not getting back. And it's an hour of the time that they're frustrated. And I think containers solve a lot of these problems because it's faster. We don't have that extra level of virtualization. Things are processes, they're very lightweight, they're very, very fast. You can go from killing a Docker container with your entire Ruby or PHP development environment to spinning it back up in under a few seconds. So, much more productive people, much happier people. Yeah, 20 minutes. Oh, I wish I could say that was the worst case, but that was probably one of the better cases for a lot of the projects I was working on. And containers are fast. Click. I hope the batteries didn't die. Oh. Virtual machines become pets, right? We spend a lot of effort maintaining them when it comes to a certain point. We are always tweaking them, we're making them better. I actually found a lot of places I was going to, they had like a golden image virtual machine where they had their own Vim configuration on it or their own Atom configuration, configuring all their developer tools. They spent a lot of time actually rebuilding those images and shifting them around everyone else so that when they went to the other machine, they could use their own tooling. And this is just, it's a waste of time at the end of the day, right? You just want to be working with your own tooling, but running it in an isolated way with all the things that you need. And containers can be immutable and consistent. And again, that's really powerful as well. You define a container, you define an image, you ship that image, and because of the copy on write mechanism, it doesn't matter what changes you make to it, or if you break it, or if you delete the root, you can drop back out, spin it up, and you're working again. So how does all of this nonsense help you, right? So I want to focus on the development environment first. Complicated dependencies become trivial. So I wish I could say applications were easy things where you define a pip file or composer file or a gem file, bundle file, all of these things, and that's it. But generally your applications require system dependencies as well, especially if you're working with PHP extensions, which have to be compiled into the core language. And if you need any sort of encrypt or encryption libraries from the operating system as well, these are things you have to install on your host before you can even start writing any code. And containers encapsulate that at the same time as you encapsulate your dependencies of your application as well. So operating system dependencies are bundled with any other dependency you need. Single source of truth for your application, you can ship that Docker file or Docker image anywhere. Right? There's nothing that people have to grok or understand in order to be able to run it. They do a Docker run and it just works. Right? You don't need to provide a 300 or 400 line README saying, install these dependencies, run these commands, do this, go make a cup of tea, come back to it, and it might be running. Right? It's a lot simpler with the Docker file. It works on both our machines. I've already touched on that, right? And everyone here works on my machine again. The speed of tearing down and up instances is seconds. Onboarding becomes a single command. And I think this is really crucial as well. I spend a lot of my time working with graduates and junior developers. And a lot of my time used to be going on the onboarding process, right? We'd set aside 3 or 4 days. And that was just to get their development environment up and running, get their editors configured, get them to make their first change. When you're using Docker and the development environment becomes so ubiquitous, is that becomes a single command. When you hire a new developer and they only have to do a Docker run, a Docker build, there's not much for them to learn there. They can get straight into the code. They can start they can get that commit done on day one of joining your company. And quickly run your tests against different versions of everything and anything. Right? This is probably one of the most important things on here. If you spend a lot of time trying to work out if you can do a migration from SQL Server 2016 to 2018, I don't know if those are real versions, MongoDB 3.2 to 3.6, any of these different things where you think, we don't know if it's going to work, and then you have to request someone to spin up a dev server with the new version so you can maybe run your tests against it, right? If you containerize all of this, including your dependencies, whether that be Elasticsearch, SQL Server, any of these other technologies, when they're in containers, you can just swap it out by changing that tag. You just say, I don't want to run my tests against SQL Server 2016. I'm going to run it against 2018. So all of these things become trivial, and that's the goal. CI/CD, who's doing continuous integration or delivery at the moment? Okay, a few more hands, that's great. So once you have a pipeline where you're building a Docker image with your really simple Docker build command, and you're distributing it with a Docker push and a Docker pull, your CI process gets to utilize all of those mechanisms as well. The other really cool thing that I see a lot more with Docker now is that when people were doing continuous integration before Docker, is that they would run their tests and they would, they'd just kill everything in their CI server. Once it passed, okay, we trust the master branch. But then when they go and deploy it, they run all of that process again. So they're fetching their dependencies, recompiling things, and shipping it because they didn't have a means of packaging all of that stuff up at that one point in time and saying, this is my known configuration that works. So I always want to ship this. And Docker gives them that, right? You build it in CI, it passes the test, and that's the image that you're going to use until you supersede it with something else. Right? So we're not repeating processes through deployment. Build steps get simple. Docker build, it's really easy. Everything is a container. Generally everything. I've not really came across many packages or technologies that I work with that don't have an official image, or someone hasn't provided an image. The caveat there is if you're going to use a non-official Docker image when you're using containers, is be cautious. They disappear very quickly. And you want to be able to test versions against multiple stacks. This is the same as I was saying about SQL Server, right? Just being able to change a tag in one of your Docker files and run your test against that is very, very important. You can also use image inheritance in multi-stage builds, and this is just a way of using composition within your Docker files so you don't have to repeat the same things over and over again. And we'll hopefully try and touch on that during the demo aspect. In production, reducing the attack surface. So all of those isolation and control group things we were speaking about, if processes don't have access to different processes or to networking stacks, they can attack them. So you just remove an entire attack surface that otherwise you would have to spend hours, weeks, months protecting against by adopting containers. On the other side of that, don't get me wrong, you can do some really stupid things with containers, right? So don't just say, by running things in containers, I'm getting all this security because that guy said so one night, right? You can also do the bad stuff, right? So be careful that you're mounting things into containers that you don't give them access to too much. Don't run host-only networking, all of these different things. Once you're more familiar with Docker and you're using containers in your day-to-day workflow, spend a little time and look into best practice and just make sure you're not putting yourself at risk. Deployments become trivial and super fast. Rollbacks even faster. If you've already deployed version 2 of your application on a server and you deploy version 3, the version 2 image is still in that machine. If something hit the fan and you have to revert very quickly, you can kill the container, spin up a new one, it'll take you less than 5 seconds. Obviously, I'm trivializing that. You may have other things that happen during a deploy, database migrations. You'll need to work that one out on your own. Sorry, there's no simple solution there. Free service discovery and load balancing. So because we have this networking isolation layer, we also provide through the Docker networks and containers, and we are going to touch on this in the demo, is that you get service discovery for free, and you can get load balancing by connecting other containers or using Docker Swarm or other orchestration tools. So all of these problems that used to be quite complex in our cloud environments, again, are being trivialized by adopting container technologies. Portable applications, you build it once, you run it anywhere, and we really want to aim to have this aspect of cattle rather than pets. right? If we have an issue with a container, we don't want to be SSHing in and fixing it. You want to kill it, you want to spin up a new one and move on and enjoy the rest of your day, right? So we don't fix containers, we destroy them. There is a lot of stuff in the Docker ecosystem. The official images are very cool. A lot of people put a lot of effort into making sure that if there is an application or technology that you may wish to use, that they're probably supported by the people that actually work on that application. You know, the PHP images are provided by people that work on PHP core. The Elasticsearch images are provided by the Elasticsearch developers. Right? Who knows how to run those applications better than them? Probably not very many people. So trying to use as many official images as you can. Other cool stuff that we get are volumes, and being able to persist data across different container runs is equally important, especially if we have caching or logging data. Logging becomes trivial, right? If you need to centralize the logs, if you're working on a web application that is running on 10 different servers and you're looking for an exception, do you want to be SSHing onto 10 different servers, going through the logs and hoping that you miraculously find it? Probably not. We want to get those logs out of there and we want to centralize it. Just by adopting Docker containers, they provide a standard means of centralizing those logs. So if you change your application to stop writing logs to a file, and you write them to standard out, you can configure the Docker daemon and all of your hosts to ship those logs somewhere for you. So you no longer have to worry about it. It supports a wide variety of protocols, the biggest one probably being the log/elk stack. It also supports Greylogs and CloudWatch logs. I don't think there's support natively for Azure, or even if that provides a login service, but I'm sure there's something that does provide it. Monitoring, the Docker daemon provides stats right away. You can type Docker stats and work out how much RAM or CPU each of your containers are using. You can ship them off of the host to another centralized location. And again, you don't really need to do too much here. So the dream is, by adopting containers, and particularly Docker in this case, is that we're getting all of this tooling for free. So why would we not do it? So let's have a look at how some of this works. I'll grab a chair. So let's start with the run rather than the build, because we want to immediately see why I would adopt this right away. Now, oh, careful. I used to say somebody shout out an application and I'd try and run it in a container, but I'm not on the Wi-Fi, so we're not going to do that. So I'm going to try and pick one of the ones we've worked with before, and I have the Mongo 3.6 image here. So when I hit run, we see log outputs right away. This is now running a process on my machine, which is MongoDB 3.6. So let me, in fact, I won't split the tabs because that would be too small. So if I run a Docker container list, we can see that we have a container with an ID that's running the image of Mongo 3.6. It started 20 seconds ago, and it gives it a nice little random name for you. Sometimes they're a bit better than Sleepy Archimedes. I apologize. I'll make sure the random's better next time. And I'm also exposing the port. So if you've used MongoDB before, you know the port is 27017. If I wanted to run more than one of these on my host, I'd maybe want to just say publish the port on some arbitrary port number. So that's what I'm doing in this case. So 32769. So now I can just run Mongo command. I can say connect on local host 32769. And I'm now in a Mongo shell. So let's just quickly say use Azure. So this is just the standard Mongo tooling. And I'm using Mongo, right? I don't know how to build Mongo. I don't know how to run Mongo. All I know is that I can use the Mongo shell a little bit because I've used it in the past, but I can take any arbitrary piece of application like this and run it with a simple command. And once you get into the, the familiarity of just Docker running everything, then you no longer have to worry about things that just aren't that important, right? How to configure MongoDB is not an important task unless you're trying to scale it in production to web scale. right? We can just standardize this stuff. When it comes to developing locally, we just want things to work. So let's drop out of that, kill the container. And if I do a Docker container, yes, it's gone. So what else can we do? How about we build an image? Well, here I have an empty Docker file. And we're just going to start with it from, and I do have loads of little helper things here, so hopefully I don't get in the way too much. And we're going to do an Alpine 3.4 image, because I think I have it available locally. Alpine is just a really small, lightweight Linux distribution. It's not very important for the aspects of the demo. But now I want to, provision an application. So let's say I want to run, and I want to install Vim, because every container should have Vim. I can do update, add, Vim, and I can save that file. Now, to start, I will run an Alpine container without the build step. This is straight up Alpine, no modifications, and I want a shell access. And I always forget, I want it to be interactive. I want a shell inside this container. So just -it. Oh, I don't have it. So I'll introduce you to Docker image ls, which lists my images. And I'll filter on Alpine. Oh, I've only got PHP. Ugh. Ubuntu. There we go. I've got a couple of Ubuntus. So same again, interactive container, Ubuntu 17.10, and we'll run bash this time. So now I have access to apt. Right? That's not a native command on my machine. I'm not running an Ubuntu operating system. If I run apt, okay. Right? It doesn't exist, but it exists here. Now I don't have an internet connection, so that's going to fail, but I can run apt-get install vim and things happen. And I'm definitely in a container, and I knew I said I wouldn't do this, but Right. I mean, I've just killed a machine. You shouldn't do this. Never do this. I can't type anything, I'm going to imagine. Oh, PS isn't found. Echoes are built in, so that wouldn't work. That's that. Right, you get the point. There's nothing on this machine that is fried. I just drop out, spin up a new one. Well, anyway, right. So this concept of disposability, right? We can just do whatever we want, and if anything ever goes wrong, go away, give me a new one, right? That's a really nice feeling, a comfortable feeling to have, especially when you're working in your development environment. Okay, so we wanted to build our own image. So we're not going to use Alpine, it doesn't exist. So, in fact, let's write $1 million application in under 3 minutes. So, I definitely do have some Elixir stuff. I want to copy $1 million.ex, which means I need to create that script. So we're going to create $1 million. I know this sidebar is a little bit small, but can everyone read the main file? So a very simple Elixir script. Very simple Docker file, all right? Although I need to put this somewhere, so let's just call this million. Well, I don't need to put the file name again. And we want to be able to run this by default when we run our image. So let's just do command Elixir, and we'll use this syntax as generally preferred. Code $1 million.ex. So I've written a really simple Elixir script. I've written a Docker file. I'm adding the script into the Docker image, and I'm saying when I run this image, the command that it should run is Elixir with a parameter of my script. Array window. So let's see. I do have Elixir here. Let's make sure my script passes. I just want to know. So that's me running it on my host. Only I actually don't have Elixir installed on my host. So I actually run all of my native commands in containers. But it's so easy to do, and they're so fast, right? We don't need to worry about the virtualization. I don't need to wait in a VM. So why bother installing any of this crap? Just have a container. But for the purposes here, I'll unfunction it so it doesn't exist. Elixir now is not on my machine. Well, let's do a Docker build, and we're going to tag it. So we'll call this $1,000,001. And that final parameter is the build context. So what actually happens when you do a Docker build is that it takes that context, which dot means this current directory, and it actually tars it all up. And it sends it to a remote host, potentially. If you're building locally, it'll send it to a Docker daemon on your local machine. But it means that your CI systems or any other sort of systems, especially if you're on Windows where Docker isn't native, that you can still use the native Docker build. It tars everything up and sends it to the daemon, which might be running on a virtual machine. So depending on whether you're running the Windows 10 subsystem for Linux with Docker support or Windows 8 or something like that, the build context is just what am I sending to the daemon for it to do the build. And what's important here is that the paths of copy, $1,000,000.ex, reflect that context. So if I had a directory called source and I only sent that script wouldn't exist. But let's do the build. It doesn't take very long. I can now run $1,000,001. And I got $1 million. So as you can see, this is really easy to work with. I think what I also want to highlight about the build process is that we have the concept of the build cache. This is what keeps Docker fast, right? Now, if I make a change to this script, oh, well, I've only got one command. Let me contrive a situation. So I'm adding extra layers. Now, what's important here is every time I have a new token in my Docker file, it creates a new layer. So this is the copy on write system we spoke about earlier. And each one of those layers is going to be cached during the build process. And we'll see that during the build. So let's pay a little bit more attention to it this time. It takes a little bit longer. Oh, well, who is? That's a bit annoying. We'll just run in our ls. So it took a little bit longer, but if I run this again, it's instant, right? It's done these commands before. It changes on the disk from each command that you run, and it monitors the context. If the context doesn't change, so what's in my local directory, then the commands in the Docker file, the output's not going to change, right? It's predictable, very deterministic. And that keeps our builds fast. So hopefully, I haven't messed this up, but if I add an exclamation mark, which makes my application infinitely better, and do a build, you can see it didn't actually do anything until the copy, right? It knows that file changed. Nothing else in that Docker file changed. Nothing else can affect that build. So you'll see that it says use cache, use cache. And you've got to understand this caching and use that in your CI. That's how you're going to get your builds from being 30 or 40 minutes down to being 6 or 7 minutes or better, right? The build cache is your friend. Try not to make it a sad panda. Okay, so we built an image and we have run an image. And I could just push that, $1,000,001, and that would go up. I'm not going to do that because I've not tagged it with a repository. So it would actually reject it because million isn't my namespace in the Docker Hub. But this is a very simple situation, right? What about when your application is a bit more complex, right? We're probably all working with databases on a day-to-day basis. Very unlikely that your script is just printing out, hey, I won $1 million, and that's it, right? Nobody's going to buy that software, unfortunately. So Docker provides another tool called Docker Compose. It expects a very simple YAML format, everybody's favorite format, right? Yes, David, yes. Oh. So we're just saying version 2.3. There are multiple versions of that. It's not really important. What is important is the fact that we want to be able to define services. So I can say that I want an Elixir service. It's going to run the image, Elixir 1.6, and I want a MongoDB service. 3.6. And because my application is so popular, we're going to add Elasticsearch into the mix as well. I think I've got 5.5 locally. So in 11 lines of YAML, I'm just saying my application uses all of these different components. So wouldn't it be nice if Docker could just make that work for me? So if I type Docker Compose up, what it's actually going to do is spin up 3 different containers with those images and make them all magically be able to talk to each other in a deterministic service discovery kind of way. So let's just spin it up. It shouldn't take too long. The container has exited, and that's just because it's not got anything to do. So if I just open a new tab, and I type Docker Compose PS, so I want to see the processes. I can see Elixir, oh, it's actually up, so that's good. Elasticsearch is running. It has some ports, but I haven't exposed them, right? So if I do localhost 9200, this is the Elasticsearch RESTful endpoint. It should say hello to me. It fails. So that's okay. And we've not exposed the MongoDB port either, so I couldn't speak to Mongo right now. But what about from inside my Elixir container? I'm just going to use my alias for brevity. And I want an interactive shell inside Elixir running bash. Oh, you don't need that interactive with Docker Compose. So do I have ping? So what if I ping Elasticsearch? It responds. What if I ping MongoDB? Oh, it also responds. What if I curl Elasticsearch on 9200? I get the Elasticsearch text back. So just by using this really simple YAML format, Docker's created a network, added host aliases to each of the containers, allowing them to speak to each other, and exposed the ports from each of the containers to each of the other containers. All of these different components can now speak to each other. But what if I want to be able to speak to it, right? Maybe I've got an Elasticsearch browser on my desktop. So that's really simple. We just say ports. We want to map 9200 on my host to 9200 inside the container. Say I want to do the same for MongoDB. Oh, what's the bin? I'm now exposing the 27017 port. And what if I want to make my Elixir script available inside of this Elixir image? Well, I can just add a volume. Take my current directory and stick it in /code in that container. So again, a couple of small changes. We're not even at 20 lines yet. So I'm going to kill all of that. So Docker Compose down, we'll just get rid of all the containers. And we're going to spin it back up with our new configuration. And you can see it takes seconds, less than seconds. We'll do a Docker PS. And we can see these ports are now exposed. You know, they're listening on 0.0.0.0. That's exactly what we want to see. Now for my host, I can curl Elasticsearch. I have access to this wonderful thing running inside of a container. And very quickly, before I run out of time, we're going to jump back into our Elixir container, running bash. And we're going to go to /code, and here's all of my files, and there's my Elixir script, which is $1 million. That's how easy it is to get started with containers. Hopefully you understand a little bit about how they work, why to adopt them, and how to get started when you go back into work tomorrow. So thank you very much for your time. I'm happy to take any questions. Don't be shy. Yeah?
When you have an interactive shell there, you start talking to it, does Docker put in host files, or has it got its own sort of DNS mapping there? Or how does it use a lookup name rather than IPs?
Yeah, it modifies the host file in each of the containers with the IP address of the container on the internal network.
Right.
It's not fancy, but it works.
And where did you get the Elixir image from? Is that new down?
So, so that's one of the official images, right? If you go to hub.docker.com, there's a whole wider range of images there. And if I just run Docker image ls, you'll see all the images that I have loads of images in my machine. Some I've built, some are official. Mongo, Python, Elixir, Golang, Elasticsearch. You know, all the things that I work with on a daily basis, I just keep caching in my machine. And that's just in case of doing Docker pull, Elasticsearch, and specifying the version I want.
What about for like security? So say you pull down an image for PHP or something like that, and you want to, your company has a really specific way they want to harm things like that. How could you actually do that? Would you actually have to create a script to just run commands on as it builds, or is there any other way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely stick the logic into your Docker file and just run the commands that you would normally run in your infrastructure. It's usually the easiest way to get started. Right? Take the processes you've got, the commands you do, replicate them in a container, or at least a Docker image, and then just refine it after that. And one of the things you'll notice when you do that approach, and I see it all the time, is that the images are huge.
Yeah.
I see people that have 3 gig images. And I'm talking about how fast Docker is, and then they're doing a pool of 3 gig. I'm like, yeah, we've missed the point here. Like, keep it small. But it's a really great way to get started. Everything you would do naturally in your environment, replicate to the Docker file.
How common is that to do? Is that something that you would do in production, or
Which aspect there?
like hardening, sort of like, so say you want to do like Laravel, for instance, or something like that. So you Laravel as an image, and then you've got Mongo as an image, but you want to put a website online. Would you literally just build that, send my scripts to it, and then just do it and quite happy with it? Or would you go through extra steps to sort of harden it? Or
Depends. I mean, once you're in a container, there's a lot of attack surfaces you don't have to worry about. So a lot of the standard techniques we use for hardening, you don't need to worry about. Like, the amount of effort people put into protecting post endpoints from files being uploaded, running scripts in temp, namespaces. Most of those disappear because if the hacker does get something up, it's generally not the end of the world depending on your application. PHP is slightly different because they get access to have access to the code, and that's a big problem for a lot of people. But you can certainly just have the file system through your to answer your actual question, yes, just put the hardened stuff inside of a Docker file, create a hardened PHP that your organization owns and provides, and your developers can just consume that. It could just be, our image PHP version hardened sim, and just distribute that. You're only doing it once. The logic stays in one place, and people consume that as well.
thank you.
Can you create your own private repositories of Docker images?
Yes, you can. The registry is open source. There are many people online. Azure does provide a container registry that runs in the cloud as well for you, or you can host your own. You can do it on your own. There are also a lot of really cool tools. One from CoreOS called Clear that will actually scan the images in your registry and warn you about any major CVEs, etc. Oh, sorry, you're behind Paul.
What's the future for Docker?
That's a tough question right now, man. Because there's some scary things happening in Docker as a company. Their CTO, CEO both left recently, and I think that's through funding pressures because they're not making any money. But it doesn't affect us because the container technologies are all open source, and Google and Microsoft and Red Hat, they're all jumping on board and doing really good things. I think the future is going to be simplifying again. Like, I know a lot of the things I've showed you here hopefully are really simple. You can go away and do them within 5 minutes time. But the going to production aspect is still difficult. Right? Building container images could be better, keeping the sizes lower, promoting best practice. I think there's still a lot of learning there, but the future, most of the changes that are going to come I think will be in the production side, especially as we've got Azure Container Service and Google Container Service and AWS launching their container Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes is one, if you're following that kind of orchestration there, and the tooling around that is changing drastically on a week-by-week and month-by-month basis. And the introduction of custom resources in Kubernetes allows developers to do some very good things.
Can you say a couple of things about Kubernetes, just what it is? What an orchestration service is.
Yeah, okay. So you built your image and you want to ship it as a product. Now you can do what you do just now, and maybe it's Ansible, Puppet, or Chef, and you can say, run this image on this machine. But eventually you're going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting there for no real reason. Right? You just want to be able to say, I want 6 of these, and there's 20 hosts on Azure. Just make it work. And that's where Kubernetes comes in. You can declaratively say, I want 10 web servers, I want 6 Elasticsearches. I don't care where they run. If one of them dies, we don't fix it, we kill it and we spin it up. Kubernetes does all of that. So you just tell it, this is what my infrastructure looks like. Make sure it always looks like that. And that's the joy of Kubernetes. Learning curve though, it's kind of up here. Whereas working with containers on your own machine, so it's a journey for sure.
And is that the model in Azure? Do you run these on infrastructure as a service, or where would you run your containers on Azure?
So you can just spin up an instance and start putting containers on it manually, for sure. But you're probably going to get to the point where you just spin up an Azure container service, and you just tell it, I want this unnecessary is, and it'll do it for you. But that's it. Once you've provided Docker files and you're pushing them somewhere that can be consumed later, the rest of it should hopefully fall into place quite naturally. But if things go wrong, I'm not here.
I think when I was looking at Azure at one point, there was some VM images of Docker as well. Is the Azure containers the right approach rather than Docker VMs?
So yeah, you will always find VMs with the Docker daemon on it because you want to be able to run containers quickly. You don't have to worry about the provisioning aspect of it. And you're not necessarily going to go spin up a 6-node Kubernetes cluster on Azure just to start playing with it. So those images that are really potential. Oh, low battery. I don't think. Yeah, so the VMs, good way to get started. Container service comes later when you're starting to roll out more containers. Once you've got more containers than one host can handle, you have to orchestrate, and that's where Kubernetes comes in. All right, thank you very much.
We've got beers and pizza in the kitchen, guys. If you want to come
Come up, please. You see, you can either wear a shirt or you can wear a
Chip shop corridor thing.
So Office 365 consists of several products, as you all are aware. Microsoft 365 consists of these three. So you've got Enterprise Mobility and Security, Office 365 Enterprise, and Windows 10 Enterprise. There's also the Microsoft 365 Business Premium package, which gives you the business version of Office 365 and business version of Windows 10. Are any of you who are running 365 running the whole M365, or are you just running? Cool. Are you just, and the whole suite gives you conditional access, obviously your desktop apps, and your full collaboration suite. So I thought I'd just give a bit of an overview for those of you who maybe aren't as aware as some others on the whole 365 services, and I'll go into some of the scenarios I come across on a daily basis. So that's just a rundown of what you get with each package. Whether it's useful or not, I don't know, but hopefully some of you may find it useful. This is where I think if you're looking at the EM&S products, where you may find benefit to your customers or to your company or your customers, and you can really leverage the potentials of Azure AD Premium. A lot of my customers are going for the E3 option because E5 tends to be a bit out of their cost range. But EM&S E3 comes with Azure AD Premium P1, which gives you things like password write back, conditional access, some of the analytics for threat management and everything. So that just goes over the differences in each Azure AD Premium. I find a lot of people adopting Azure AD on its own, whether it's the free or the basic, purely because so many people are now in 365. It's kind of your first step in there. And identities is one of the key things whenever I'm doing a migration. And I'll kind of focus on that on the next couple of slides. Your identities typically would mimic your email address. So everyone in here, I'm guessing, has AD of some sort or other. You have your user principal name and your SAM account name. More than often, your user principal name will not match your email address. Perfect example of a customer or a company who haven't got that right is Microsoft. They've got a UPN for their logon, different email address, and something else for your SIP address. That used to be the case a few years ago. Don't know if it's the same now. Sarah? So if you can standardize on your identity, it makes your journey into the cloud a lot easier. So the common migration scenarios I see is most people are adopting Exchange in the first instance. So they're going from Exchange on premises, they're going from a third-party hosting Exchange, or something like Google Mail, or some other options. And you've got the other on-premises platforms, so Notes, GroupWise, Zimbra. Those can be quite nasty sometimes, and there are third-party tools out there that do that. I don't know if any of you had any experience of or used those third-party tools products before, like Notes or GroupWise. Quite painful moving from those. And you get what you pay for in the tools. You got Quest or Binary Tree. They provide some really good tools to do it. They provide the coexistence as well. Or you've got things like Migration Wiz, Cloud Migrator, which are a lot cheaper, but you don't get as much in the way of services from them. And you have the rich or simple coexistence scenario. So that's where you either just want the mail flow to work between the two, or you want full rich coexistence of free busy. And that's where you need to look at something like Binary Tree or Quest. And then you've got Tenant to Tenant. Microsoft are working on this. I don't know if any of you have been in one tenant and needed to move across to another tenant at all. It's not that simple, especially if you've got lots of users. Biggest problem being you can't have the same domain name on two tenants at any one time. It just will break the system otherwise. So, do you need to use a third-party tool? I see so many things on my Facebook feed, my LinkedIn feed saying, mitigate all your problems with using something like Code2 to migrate to 365, or use Skykick to migrate to 365, whatever your platform. Well, technically, yes, you can do it, but if you're using native Exchange, I would always say use the hybrid, because it's the seamless migration path for your end users. And actually, it's probably one of the most straightforward setups you can do for your Exchange environment. Providing you're running Exchange 2010 or above, there's no need to put in additional infrastructure into your server room, because it just works. Microsoft still support Exchange 2010. Okay, it's in extended support, it's coming to end of life soon, but the hybrid configuration works on 2010. So I've worked with customers where they've said, oh, somebody's come in, we're running 2010, they told us we have to put in a 2016 Exchange server to migrate. No. My view on that is, why rock the boat? Why add more risk and extra headache that you don't really need at that point in time for your project? You can migrate seamlessly from 2010, so just do it. Third-party tools, I would only say if you've got an issue with your Exchange system that doesn't support hybrid, or using something like GroupWise, Notes, cloud hosted, or you're doing tenant-to-tenant migrations. With Exchange 2003 and 2007, anybody still running one of those old systems? Still? Wow. Which one? So not too old then. I had a chat with a customer who's still running 2003. You can move seamlessly from those platforms as well. All you need to do with 2007 is install the Exchange 2013 server. Microsoft provide you with a license free of charge. It's something Microsoft don't usually do a lot of. But that license is, the condition of that license is you have to use it as a hybrid server. As soon as you put a mailbox on it, you have to license it. So, what makes a successful migration into 365, or more specifically into Exchange? Planning, like any project really. Testing, communication, early adopters, and leveraging on the new services that you're providing to them. Users don't like change. I think that's a common thing we all face. As soon as you want to give something new, it's like, oh, change, I don't want it. So if you can sell it to them with benefits of new services, mobility, productivity, access your stuff anywhere, anytime, they think, yeah, that's great, I want a piece of that. But you can't get to that point until you've gone through the other options. So look at what you've got. I'll go through some of the headaches I've come across in a typical migration. Test it, have a couple of left users' mailboxes that you can just move up and down, because it's as easy to get into 365 it's as easy to get out of 365 as it is to get in. So you can move your mailbox up and say, oh, that's not working properly, I'll move it back down. It's pretty seamless for that account. And then obviously communicate it to your end users. If you give them pre-warning that you're going to migrate their mailbox, they're usually fine. If you just migrate their mailbox, they'll say, oh, I've lost connection to Outlook. Okay, so that drop of connection is only for about 5 minutes, but 5 minutes is an eternity for a user who relies on their email 24/7. So, authentication and identities. This is kind of the key part to successful migration, or to any setup of your Azure AD. You've got password hash sync, pass-through authentication, which came out about a year or two ago. ADFS, federated with third-party products like Okta, Ping, or One Identity, or you've got cloud authentication. Those of you who are in 365, who's using password sync? Anybody using pass-through just now? Cool. What about ADFS? Anybody using a third-party product? So we've got pretty much anybody just cloud only. So we've got a whole array of things. So they're all valid. There's no right or wrong way to do it. ADFS, obviously requires a lot of infrastructure, but it may be your environment requires that. So Microsoft best practice is 2 ADFS servers, 2 WAP servers. You know, when 365 first came out, password sync wasn't available, and you have 1 Exchange server. You want to move to the cloud to ditch your Exchange server. Microsoft, if you want to use your identity, you've got to put in 5 servers. It's like, where's the logic in that? I want to ditch 1 server, I've got to replace it with 5. So they then brought out password hash sync, which made life a lot easier. You don't get that rich single sign-on experience, although now with Azure AD Connect, they've given you that experience. But back in the days, password hash sync, you know, 2 separate accounts. It's effectively same sign-on, not single sign-on. Pass-through authentication is a pretty good one now, because you can install the AD authentication agent. I usually recommend the customer puts it on all their DCs, because that way, if one of the DCs falls over, the other one will pick up the authentication requests. ADFS, only the large enterprise customers I work with seem to really be going down the ADFS route, predominantly because they want to use MFA on premises. So one of the other options you get with your licensing in 365 is your Azure Mfa Server. You've got 2 options, Cloud MFA or Mfa Server. Again, Mfa Server requires you 4 additional servers. So you can double up on some things, but because it requires web front ends, you can't put it on your ADFS servers because it will just break. But with ADFS 20 or ADFS 4 on server 2016, you can actually integrate ADFS with Cloud MFA quite seamlessly. I'll show you it later on. Federated with something like Okta. I worked with a customer who had that. Interestingly enough, they've just bought a few thousand DMNS licenses to replace Okta, because Okta kindly doubled their pricing for them, because I think Okta realised they're not that little player that they used to be. They're now a big fish, and they can get away with charging a bit more. And cloud authentication is what a lot of people who've predominantly new starts, new businesses who are just starting up, they seem to go down that route, or companies who just want to ditch their entire on-premises infrastructure. So, biggest headaches I've come across whenever migrating or setting up the infrastructure to migrate. Authentication identities. Customers can never decide on this. I want ADFS. No, we go password sync. Oh, no, we may go pass through. I've heard of Okta. I'll go down the Okta route. They like to change their mind. Certificates. Exchange is obviously very certificate heavy. I say it's very heavy. You just need the one, but you need the sans set on there, and it relies on your certificate quite a lot. So you need to make sure you've got a valid verified cert on there. Autodiscover. The number of customers I've worked with whose Autodiscover isn't set up right. It's one of the fundamentals of Exchange, and it's actually very straightforward to enable, but some customers just don't want to publish it. They think there's this worry of publishing Autodiscover. Reverse proxies, so whether they're using something like TMG or something else sitting in between their Exchange and the internet. Again, back in the dark days, you would want to put something like TMG or ISA in front of Exchange. Whereas now, Exchange, the way it's built is it's built to be published to the internet. People still have this fear of publishing their Exchange server from port 443 straight out to the internet. Firewall rules. I send a list of rules to the customer with prereqs to say, right, we need to migrate, or in order to migrate your systems, we need to have port 25 opened up to the Exchange Online IP addresses to achieve TLS encryption between 365 and on-prem. They quite often get that wrong. They may well be using a message hygiene product, Message Labs, Mimecast, or something like that. It's just add the Exchange Online IP addresses to that rule. And then you have to go through change control, and that can sometimes add 2-3 weeks onto a project just because they've not done the prereqs. Load balancers, more so with Exchange 2010 with the affinity groups. So when you are using the mailbox replication service on Exchange 2010, if you have a load balancer, your request comes in to pull the mailbox and it hops from server to server to server. And I've had it where an empty mailbox took 2 days to migrate because it just couldn't decide which server to migrate from. 2013, 2016 addressed that, and it's pretty much a stateful connection. So it comes in, hits the load balancer, and it starts pulling it through from that server. So sometimes we've had to put workarounds in place for the load balancers. Again, the security one, some people are reluctant to provide external users with the admin accounts they need. I've gone in, asked for Exchange org rights and domain admin rights, and I've been given the lowest level possible. And it's like, I can't do my job. So again, you just bang your head against a brick wall. And patch levels. It's always good practice to keep servers patched. We all do that, don't we? Yeah, we're all good admins there. And end users, they can be problematic sometimes. Or in my case, anyway, I'm sure we have great end users who just you love so much and never give you any hassle. And security. A project I'm working on just now, they have a dedicated security team out in the States, and they literally, every request I make, they throw me 20 questions about that request. It's a very straightforward one, and I then find having to battle these other questions. So there's certain tools and resources I like to use whenever I'm migrating. So some of the stuff I do from home, some of the stuff I do from customer site. So the very first tool I like to use when I'm working from home is Spotify. Nothing beats it, just work away, put your daily mix on, and it's all good. The other tool I found really useful, I'm guessing a lot of you may use it, you may not, is OneNote. I use OneNote within Microsoft Teams, or I use it just as the standard desktop client. So when I'm having a chat with a customer or something else, OneNote, it just spirals out of control sometimes. It's got so many tabs on there. Notepad++ is a really good one. I like it when I'm updating things like host files, because the number of times I've forgotten to open it as admin. You go to save the host file and OneNote just reopens it as admin for you without having to save it to your desktop, copy it back across. Powershell. 6 years ago, probably hated PowerShell. I didn't really know much about it. But in order to connect to 365 and perform more powerful tasks, PowerShell is actually the bee's knees. It makes your job so much easier. Scripting a task in 365 is pretty straightforward. A lot of my job is using CSVs and importing them through PowerShell. It just makes my job so much easier. The other one I find really useful, more so for customer documentation, is Greenshot. I know there's many screenshotting tools out there. I find Snippet, the one you get with Windows, pretty pants sometimes, just because you've got to copy, Alt Tab and copy paste, and whereas Gadwin, just print screen, you get your selection window. The XML builder. How many of you are running Office 365 Pro Plus? Have you deployed it through SCCM or any other packaging technology? This will build you your XML file, or more importantly with 2016 it will even deploy a MSI file. I don't know if any of you have seen the XML builder at all. It's a lifesaver. It's especially good for things like if you're running Visio or Project, the MSI file, and you then go and install the click to run Office 365 Pro Plus. I don't know if you noticed, but Visio and Project then broke. Well done, Microsoft. The only way around that is you can then install the products through here and use your licensing that you have through that. So you just install the click to run versions and everyone's happy. The other one I spend a lot of time in is in the Exchange Remote Connectivity Analyzer. Do a lot of you use this tool? Yeah, it's an absolute lifesaver. For things like Autodiscover, but also the tab I use the most is the Message Analyzer. When you build up your hybrid with Office 365, you will publish, you'll open up port 25 on your firewall to allow that secure message flow between cloud and on-prem. Sometimes the messages don't get through and they get flagged as spam. The message analyzer on this is great because it tells you where it's getting stopped, and you can just view the headers. It's a lot easier than viewing it in a text file. And it actually gives you each hop and what it's done. The other one I've used it for is the free busy, because sometimes I've had it where free busy just doesn't seem to want to play ball. But you come here and it says it's working, but it goes through the hops, and then you can actually see why it's failing. And then I come on to things like third-party tools. Do any of you use EV, Semantic EV Enterprise Vault, or any other archiving tool? So Simply Migrate. It's a relatively new product. I don't know if any of you have come across it before. It's been around for maybe 2 or 3 years now. They base themselves on archive migration. So another scenario I have is customers move to 365, but they've got a ton of data in EV or some other archiving vault. And they use stubbing. So they move their message up to 365. When you're in the office, the stubs still work. What Simply Migrate does is it rehydrates the mailbox. So that will look at the stubs, look at the EV, and actually remove the stub and replace it with the original message. Because you get a slightly larger mailbox than what you used to on-prem. It's 100 gig, so hopefully that should keep your users happy. I don't know if anyone's got any close to 100 gig yet. I think mine's sitting about 2. But yeah, Simply Migrate will enable you to rehydrate the mailbox directly into 365. A number of other products will require you to rehydrate the mailbox before you move it, and that obviously has an impact on your Exchange infrastructure or other messaging platforms, because basically you may not have the capacity to rehydrate 30, 40 mailboxes, let alone 300, 400. Migwiz. That's one I use predominantly for tenant to tenant migrations, purely because it's a cloud-based product. And it's almost just point click. You give the account impersonation rights on both tenants. It will read the source, copy to the target. It's not as intelligent as doing it from Exchange to 365. Reason being is it just looks at the source, copies it to the data. Then you do another sync, looks at the source, copies to the target. In between those 2 copies, if users deleted an email, marked it as read, or moved it to a folder, it won't actually synchronize it. It'll say, if you moved it to a folder, I've got a new folder, I'll copy that message across. But the message is still in their inbox, it'll be in the folder. If they've deleted a message, it won't pick up that deletion. So these are the drawbacks of some of the third-party tools. The other one, I use it a lot. Sometimes I feel like a bit of a fraud. I go into a customer because they've asked me to come in and look at a problem. 9 times out of 10, the first thing I do is I have a quick Google on that problem, because it's some weird and wonderful kind of setting they've got, and it's just, I think sometimes consultancy is interpreting what Google throws at you sometimes. And then the last one that I use is Azure. I do all my labbing in Azure, so I've got an MSDN subscription, so I get my whopping £115 a month. I've got 2 VMs up there. I shut them down at night just to save my credit. But I've got one server running my DC, ADFS. Sorry, I've got 3 servers up there. So I've got one server running my DC, ADFS, AD Connect, network policy server, pretty much everything, best practice and all. And then I've got another server running my WAP, my application proxy, and the third server running my Exchange. But it just provides me with that ability to either demo it to a customer or test something out. So if a customer's got a certain problem, I can then just lab it and get back to them. So that's my thoughts on migrating. Obviously 365 encompasses more than Exchange. Are any of you guys using Teams? Cool. It's a really cool product. We started using it within the team I'm in. I'll try and not use the word teams too much. But it just makes life so much easier. Bringing all your products into one. If you're not using it, I'd recommend you go back and have a look at it. If you're running 365 and you're not using Teams, shame on you. I'd really recommend going and playing around with it. The back end of Teams is Office 365 groups. So you can view it in Outlook, you can view it in SharePoint, you can view it in the Teams desktop app. And it just brings the whole thing together, which is great. But I'll just go through some typical migration scenarios, setups of users. So if I do that.
You mentioned Teams, just a quick question, right?
Yep.
Waited to loop to the end, but how do you position Teams versus Skype then, or mutual exclusive, or both, or when you're in greenfield?
When you're greenfield, Teams, because there's more functionality coming to it now. Telephony is part of it as well. Skype for Business, I really like. At work, because we're partners of anyone who sell anything, we use Jabber, which I hate. It's just clunky. I'd much prefer to use Skype for Business, but the problem with Skype for Business is the telephony side of it is not enterprise ready, I would say. And they've got a long way to go. It seems to be enterprise ready for telephony. But from an IM and presence point of view, absolutely. If you've not used Skype in Force, push down the Teams route. If you are using Skype in Force, I'd say slowly try and get users away from it, because it's all in that one desktop client. That's the thing I love. I mean, yeah, we use it heavily within the department at work. I use department, not team. I mean, when we first had it, the guys were just sharing pictures of their dogs and things just for the sake of it. You know, here's a picture of my cute dog. It's like, yeah, great. But yeah, it's certainly getting a lot more traction than I think Office 365 groups had as well. Because they came in, Microsoft kind of made it the default whenever you go to create a new DL in the Exchange Admin Center. You click on new, and by default create an Office 365 group, which was good in some ways, but you didn't want an Office 365 group. You just wanted a district that you could send emails to. So I think Teams has kind of answered that, and it just, yeah, I love the way how it integrates everything.
So that's the Office 365 client.
So yeah, here's my lab running in good old Azure. Let me connect. So I've got a user who is, the other problem is I have so many browsers open in private and incognito to log on to different tenants. Or if I run out of credits, shut my VM. Did that a few weeks ago for me in a lab, in a demo. Couldn't go on to make Exchange set, but then I realised I ran out of credits. There you go. Yeah. So this is just a standard on-premises mailbox. I love this feature. It detects I'm in UK, but it still wants me to select my time zone. Can you feed that back, please, Sarah? Yeah, exactly. So I've not got any mail in here because I've only set that user up earlier on today. That's me. If I go into my admin center, this one. Are any of you guys using conditional access? How are you finding it? Yeah. Any of you have it as part of your licensing and not using it? Or you don't know if you have it for your licensing?
The geofencing part is awkward though, when you're trying to share stuff out with these servers.
Yep.
Especially if your traffic groups globally and pops out somewhere.
Yeah.
If you've got identity protection as well, it's a P2 feature.
Yeah.
That combined with it is really a focus. You can base your conditional access based on this profile.
Exactly.
It's really powerful.
I do like the impossible travel ones. I always use Russia as an example. I don't know why. So the wonderful ones, I would say, is always enable MFA for outside. Reason being, another customer I work with, one of these well-known trucking companies, you see their lorries on the motorway all the time. Their CEO got a spearphishing email, and it was, you've got messages on hold in Office 365. Click here to log in and release them. So like any good CEO, he knew exactly what he was doing. So now it's a phishing email, I better not do anything. Click. Clicks on the email, brings up an Office 365 login page. It actually looked very similar, apart from one character that was blatantly obvious to somebody who's in the portal every day. But to somebody who doesn't use the portal a lot, they wouldn't know. I put my credentials, logged in, goes into 365. Oh, I've got no messages. Must have just been, they must have released. Doesn't think anything of it. And all of a sudden, everyone starts to get emails from the CEO saying things. And it wasn't until they realized that this had happened, then thought, why don't we look at MFA? Again, with Azure AD Premium P1 and EMNS, MFA comes as part of that package. And it just prevents any new device from logging onto the 365 service without challenging you for that additional verification. So for those of you who haven't seen the migration before, it's literally much like it is when you move a user from one database to another. You just select Migrate to Exchange Online, go through, I want to move them using the remote move. Select your user. I think it's primary endpoint. For some reason, I can't delete my endpoint. Yeah, that's the one. Another, whilst that's doing that, another really good resource I found is, maybe it's the other one then. 365, whenever you're building labs, if any of you have the ability to do a lab, it needs an SSL cert. Now, some people allow you to buy them and expense them. I mean, they're not that expensive. If you go somewhere like Namecheap, you can get a SAN cert for about 20 quid. There's a website called sslforfree.com. I don't know if you've come across it. And it gives you a 90-day cert, which gives you, I think, up to 100 names. And you can just recreate it after 90 days. There's no time limit on it. You can just recreate it after 90 days, recreate another one. But it's great if you're just using it for demo and labbing purposes. That is the right one. No way. Azure security, my password expired the other day. Let's try again. The other cool feature now that they've given you is these options here. So you can automatically start the batch, and then you manually complete it. So that, if you're running Exchange 2007 and going through a 2010 server or 2010, 2013, 2016, you can do that pre-stage migration. So if you are looking at going into 365 and you've got users with, say, a 10, 15 gig mailbox, you can actually do a pre-stage sync and it migrate that user's mailbox up to 90%. And what happens is it will drop that connection when you click complete, and it only takes 5 minutes to complete the mailbox. So as far as the user is concerned, their mailbox is unavailable for 5 minutes. But as far as you're concerned, it's taken maybe 24 hours to do that initial sync, but it's not affected the user in any way whatsoever. But these are relatively new, these scheduling. So you can start the batch at a given time and complete it at a given time, which means there's very little intervention for you guys to actually have to log on and then complete them.
If you're killing off your own Kubernetes server to choose the change records, presumably.
Yes. Now that's a good point there, because the idea is I'm going to move to Office 365, move all my users up to Exchange Online. I can ditch my Exchange server. Yes, technically you can do that, but to be supported by Microsoft, you need to maintain that on-premises Exchange server. No mailboxes have to sit on it, but the reason being is your authoritative source of all your identity is AD. So all your attributes are managed by AD, therefore Exchange is managed by AD. Yes, you can update it through Attribute Editor or add cedit, but Microsoft provide you with that Exchange 16 instance free of charge. So take use of it. And something else a lot of customers I work with forget about is they have an SMTP relay. They've got the all-important HR system that sends out your pay slips ready. People don't know if they've been paid or not if they don't get that email. So maintaining that server gives you the SMTP relay, the management of your user accounts. You may have multiple address policies. You can't assign address policies in Office 365 as easily as you can in Exchange on-prem. So it just takes out that admin overhead as well. But the key thing there is the support. Microsoft will assist you with support if you're not running it, but they may get to a point and say, well, actually you need to run an on-premises Exchange server to be fully compliant with support. Yep, so you go cut over and then just have it cloud identities only. Yep. Still if you're running AD Connect, still in order to be fully supported, you need to maintain that Exchange server. But it comes down to size of customer as well, I think. Yeah.
The docs site cut over migration, the last step was on the stock sheet.
Yeah. Does it say anything about removing Azure AD Connect? No.
You need to keep the passwords.
Yeah, if you want to keep the passwords, you do need to keep that. But the problem is, because you're keeping password sync and AD Connect in place, your source of identity is still AD. And probably they missed some bits off with that, saying uninstall Exchange. That technically you should uninstall AD Connect, but that's not going to happen because we all like our password sync.
You want to try and some of our customers want to get rid of all
Yeah. I think I had a chat with some of the guys in the office today, and we've got customers who are looking to go fully cloud because you've got Windows 10 as your AD join. What need is AD on premises these days? You may have legacy apps that you need access to. Other than that, most of the stuff now, a lot of customers are putting their file shares up into SharePoint Online, the docs into OneDrive, obviously email. They're using other. Sorry. Yep. Well, something I didn't know about, but you have the web print as part of Server 2016. I haven't really looked into it much. which I need to look into, which sounds something else. Yeah, the other thing whilst that mailbox is migrating. Do many of you run hybrid AD with Office 365? So hybrid AD enables you to sync your computers into the Azure AD. And it comes down to conditional access. So you can then create a rule, a conditional access rule, to only allow domain joined PCs access to 365. So I've got my Windows 10 VM on here. So if I think it's this one, if I go to portal.office.com, so this takes me, that's my ADFS page, because you can now customize ADFS to look like Azure AD as well. So this is using the Azure MFA. So I get that little prompt to say approve. But because I'm not a domain joined device, it won't let me log into the service as part of the whole conditional access. Now this one is domain joined. Let's mute that because we don't need sound. So the difference with this one is because I'm Azure AD joined, I'm connected to the network, I think. I've got my VPN up. It's a great little product, soft ether. Just running another server in Azure and VPNing up to there. So that's me logged in, and it didn't prompt me for any credentials. I'm running ADFS, but I've got the hybrid AD in place. If I disconnect my VPN now. Ask me for MFA because I've already authenticated. But it just gives me single sign-on still, even though I'm not connected to my corporate network, because now it's actually using my computer logged on to the Azure AD, not on-prem AD. So if I go to not that one, let's go to this one. Here. Azure AD and devices. You can see there it's hybrid Azure AD joined. So it just means if you've got a corporate laptop and you're off network, it will still connect to 365 because it uses your Azure AD credentials, which obviously you'll then authenticate back to your on-premises AD. My kids were killing me because I was playing around with conditional access and kept iPods and iPads and things. And I wiped one of them just to wind them up. The other features we got, I'll show you on my actual Softcat one, is any of you using the app Proxy for access to your on-premises infrastructure through Azure? It's pretty neat. So in fact, we've got this. So if I go to my apps. So what the app Proxy does is it creates a stateful connection from a little agent that runs on a server on-prem up to the Azure AD. So for example, our SharePoint site is running on SharePoint on-prem, but we don't open port 443 up to the internet. It's completely closed off. But because I'm authenticated to Azure AD, it'll let me access our SharePoint site. So it ticks the boxes for security as well. So, you know, some people don't like Port 3 opened up to your SharePoint site. It just means you're signed into Azure AD. It gives you access to premises web services. You can have one app proxy, 2 app proxies, 3 app proxies, and they can service requests to pretty much most web servers, providing they support SAML or Kerberos authentication.
And presumably that's controlled by conditional access as well.
Yep. And the other one is, so we use things like Concur for our expenses. So again, this is all controlled by conditional access. As soon as you start pulling on all your identities into 365 and using Azure AD for single sign-on, it's this whole thing of you disable the account, you've then disabled access. Prime example is things like Twitter and Facebook. You know, marketing have a new starts. You then say, or marketing usually typically then say, here's the email address and here's the password for Facebook. Here's the email address. Here's the password for Twitter. That's not very secure, really. What you can do is you can create in Azure AD and publish it to the marketing people, and actually make the head of marketing the manager of that app. And you can then add those people in manually to save them coming to IT to say, look, I want to add so-and-so to the group. It then means if somebody gets pushed out the door for not very good reasons, and they've got the credentials for Facebook and Twitter, start bad-mouthing the company. Whereas if it's all done through conditional access, in the apps, you can block their account and they've lost access to it immediately. It's just trying to simplify things for you as IT admins, increase the productivity of the user and ease of access to the services without compromising on things like security. I mean, there's so much in here. The conditional access one is, I think, really cool. It springs. Do any of you guys use any MDM solutions other than Intune or?
Yep.
Which one are you using?
UEM or BES.
Okay.
Library.
Are you looking at going to?
Yes.
Cool. It's a good move. A number of people are using Mobile Iron. The biggest shift change with MDM and Office 365 is traditionally you manage the device. Now everything's targeted at the user on the device. And it's just trying to get your head around that, and sometimes security's head around that. The fact that you've got to apply the policy to the user, not necessarily the device. Whilst yes, you do have MDM, you can deploy apps, you can deploy profiles and other settings to the device and block things like screen print. Most of it is targeted at the user. And typically what we see is blocking access to the 365 services from anything else other than the approved apps. So the approved apps list is things like Outlook, the Microsoft Teams app, the OneDrive app. And that means you've got the selective wipe capability. So it means BYOD. I keep on wanting to say BYOB. It means that whole problem, or that may well have been a problem before, is no longer an issue. You can do that selective wipe. And I know there are things like the, I don't know a huge amount about GDPR, but I know one of them is the contact sync. So you may have your business contacts in Outlook. You may not want them to go onto the end user's phone in their contacts list. So the Outlook app prevents you from synchronizing your contacts as well. It just helps you meet all your other compliance needs as well. But that's it in a very high level kind of thing. Happy with any other questions if you guys have any. But yeah. Any questions?
See if you've got a tenant, AD sync up.
Yep.
Syncing from.
Yep.
Is that an easy step? Is that a case of?
No. It can. You've got a couple of things you need to take into account there. One is mutable IDs. When you sync from one tenant or from one Active Directory, you've got your soft anchor mutable ID. I take it, have you done something like a migration to Exchange Online, and then you're doing an AD migration afterwards? Yep. Seen that scenario a lot of times. The other thing you need to take into account is everything you're synchronizing from this AD includes. So if you then create a new user account, same UPN, but without the proxy addresses, the users in the cloud will lose all their proxy addresses. So you need to then also ensure that the accounts in new AD
have all the proxy addresses listed with them as well. There are a few scripts out there to do that. You basically get mailbox and get all your proxy addresses, then enable remote mailbox in target AD and set additional addresses to be what you've got in the list. The other thing as well is you disable AD sync. So I think the only way to do it now is through Powershell, so you set MSL sync disabled. It can take up to 72 hours, usually about 4 or 5. I've had it where it's taken 2 weeks. I've ended up logging into
Microsoft and there's sync in the back system, because you've got Azure AD, you've then got the Exchange Online AD, you've then got the SharePoint Online AD, you've then got the Skype for Business AD, and they all sync with each other. And what happened was the link between Azure AD and Exchange Online AD had just not kicked in for some reason. So you convert the accounts to cloud only, and then you just do get MSL user, then set MSL user mutable ID null. And that will clear the mutable ID, and then when you synchronize from new AD, it should just match user for user. So there's a bit of stepping to go through, but what I would recommend you do is don't migrate everyone from the new AD. Select an OU with maybe 1 or 2 users in, migrate up, sync it, happy days. Then maybe move 5 more users into there, another happy days. Once you're comfortable it's done everyone, then just add the rest of the users in. That's probably the best way to do it.
In the case where we try to go serverless pretty much, so off ProPlus, previously to config it, you needed a server share to host it from. Did it mean to say that you can create an MSI out there?
Well, yeah, it all depends where you want to pull down the install files from. So you can actually have it as it is now to pull it down from the internet, but you've got to bear in mind your bandwidth. So you can create that offline installer and have your click to run install files located on a file share, or you can have them located directly from Microsoft network. It then brings into things like your branch cache and what channel you're going to use. You can that MSI creation. It will actually just create it as a small MSI package, maybe 2 meg, which just pull everything from the internet. I think going serverless is a great end game because it just takes out the headache of your on-premises infrastructure.
You can always use into NPM to push it down.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's. Yeah. So.
You're talking about using Untitled to do multiple tenants. I've started using a Chrome user per tenant. I create a new Chrome user ID, each tenant, and the switch goes onto users.
Yeah, that's fun.
You don't have any migration for the VDI?
Yes. The biggest problem there is OST files, caching. We use a product called FS Logic, which, I mean, you can actually map the profiles to VHD and have the OST file stored in the VHD. FS Logic seems to be the best thing to use. And the beauty of 2013, 2016 is that slide is saying we're going to cache 6 months worth of VLAN. It's just that through group policy. I mean, actually, saying group policies there. The other thing to consider if you're going serverless is your MGM policies and Intune policies that you apply to your Windows 10 devices are not as rich as you would get with GPOs. You can't do things like custom reg files. You can through certain means, but officially you can't. You lose a lot of functionality, but again, if you're going serverless, there's probably reasons for that, and therefore you wouldn't possibly need those settings anyway. Anyone else? Cool. Thank you very much.
So if you go to root.it and enter that pin,
Sorry, can't see the screen, but throw something at you maybe. Oh, that's it. Excuse me. Thank you for that.
so what is the limit of resource tags you can add to a resource now? So it's 15. So you need to be quite clever when you're tagging your resources.
You get 2 phones in the go, mate.
The open source marketing team created a wee sloth guy. He's got a name. What is it? Yeah, it's pretty good. So which Office 365 product would you use to see who you collaborated with? It's a great tool for showing you who you've collaborated with, what files you've been using, files other people have been using. Shows you when you've been checking your emails, like if you've been doing Autodiscover and stuff like that. So it's a great tool. It's quite scary when you look at some of the stats.
Don't make a big problem.
Yep. how many regions does Azure have? I don't think this has changed since I wrote it.
Is it the latest answer or last month's answer? I'm sorry, I'm questioning that, I'm sorry. We were told a different one yesterday.
What were you told yesterday?
52.
Oh. Oh well, maybe I've missed it in an instant.
Robbed, it's robbed. Not even close.
How many Azure virtual machines can you register against an Azure Recovery Services vault? Now this recently changed. So yeah, they upped it recently to 1,000 because it was only 100 I think up until last week. So, the bell will go up. Who does it belong to? Hopefully that's an easy one. Last question. What is a Docker swarm?
Seriously? Isn't it sort of like Microsoft Partner exclusive, isn't it? No?
There is the SQL user group will be holding an all-day event later in September this year called SQL Glasgow. It's not just going to be about SQL, there's going to be data warehousing, Power BI, Azure, a whole host of topics. It's a completely free event, so check it out and keep an eye on that. They're still looking for speakers if you're interested in that as well. But thank you for coming tonight. We will be back in June for our next meet up, so check that out as well. And thanks to our speakers, Andy and David Slayton. But thank you guys.